Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Meepleville Meets. Today, we are very pleased to have all the way from up north, from Canada, a very prolific designer and a very nice guy. I had the chance to spend some time with him at the gathering. Please welcome Sen Lim today. How you doing, Sen?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And as I did mention, you are from what they call the Great White North. Is that correct?
Yeah, although I think I'm actually further south than some states are. So I'm in London, which is maybe 2 hours north of Windsor.
Okay.
So 2 hours south of Toronto, 2 hours north of Windsor. So right smack in between, the middle of it. And I do believe, like, I'm further south than where I grew up, and where I grew up was Sault Ste. Marie, which is like literally right next to Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. So I'm pretty sure that I'm actually further south than some people in some states, but like literally just the UP.
Right. You know what's funny is I actually went to Sault Ste. Marie, or very near there, to Drummond to Drummond Island. It's
Drummond Island.
Yeah, you know it's funny. I mean, well, we're getting off the subject, but I was actually on a reality TV show up there. It was called it was called Fat Guys in the Woods, and did the show.
Not hilarious that it's called Fat Guys in the Wood, but it's hilarious that you were up there. That's interesting.
I know, yes, I know. But so I know exactly where that area is. It's absolutely beautiful up there.
Yeah.
But here's the thing about it. You don't seem to have that boot. Like, you don't seem to have that kind of Canadian accent.
Well, it's funny. So the more tired I am, the more Chinese I sound, actually. So, but I was born in Canada. I was raised in Canada. It's just that my parents don't have that accent either. So my mom was raised she was raised in Brunei, and my dad was raised in Brunei. But my mom went to school in Britain, and she was raised by like nuns way before that. So she doesn't really have the strong Chinese accent. And because my parents moved away, they didn't really move away. They ran away from China because of the war. So the Japanese occupation in World War II. That's what they escaped from. Okay. And they escaped into Malaysia, and so their accent is very weird. It's this weird combination of like Malay and Southern Chinese, which is like, yeah, they speak Mandarin, but it's more like my dad speaks like a dialect called Hainanese, which is like a Min dialect, which is different. It's just different, right?
So what do they speak at home?
Mandarin.
They speak Mandarin at home?
Yeah, because my mom's from Hubei, so she doesn't speak Southern Min. She speaks a different dialect.
Oh, okay.
So at home, they speak Mandarin. And it's funny because, as I was telling you, that I grew up way up north. Way up north is where there's no Chinese people. Well, there's literally maybe 10 of us, maybe like 10 kids. And so there was no weekend Mandarin school. I'm sure one of the parents could have started one, and they probably would have loved to, but there just wasn't enough call for it, I guess. And so a lot of the kids that I grew up with, we grew up in that time, like in the 70s and 80s, where it's like, don't see color, everybody assimilate. It's easier for you to assimilate if you don't speak the language. It was funny because all my friends had these funny English names like Edmund and Kelvin and stuff like that, and I got stuck with the Chinese name, which was rare amongst my friends. I think I'm the only. Am I the only one? Oh wow! Yeah. I think I'm the only one. My sister and I were probably the only two kids who were Chinese who didn't have an English name. Like, everybody else had an English and a Chinese name. We just had a Chinese name. And
so let me ask you something about that real quick, Sen. Because I know a lot, because we have a lot of Asian people who come into Meepleville, and what is the deal with that? Why is it just a matter of trying to assimilate in society to give quote unquote an Americanized name, or what's the whole deal with that?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know how much you follow politics in the States, but you actually had a candidate, Mr. Yang, who said things like, we've got to be more like Americans, we've got to fit in, and that's the mentality from like the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Okay. Where your kids, you name them with an English name, and it's why you see a lot of Chinese people who have funny, like really funny, weird English names that no American or Canadian person would ever name their kid. They really wouldn't, right? They're like these old-timey Britishisms and strange names that don't make sense. And it's an attempt to fit in, and it's an attempt to, a lot of times it's like we just like the sound of it.
Yeah, but the thing about it is, Because again at Meepleville, and when I ask, well, then what's your original name? And I'm like, that's so cool. Why don't you use your
I
original
don't know.
name?
Well, so I mean, there's another thing about that. Like, so in America and Canada, like people that look like me are considered the model minority. Like we're the good minority, right? It's such a weird thing to say.
No.
But it's that type of thing where no, we don't want to rock the boat because we're good. We're good. And I mean, we're going to get into it right now, but it's the whole reason why it's like, okay, so how can we as Asian Americans and Asian Canadians not support things like Black Lives Matter? Because, we wouldn't have this quote unquote elevated status as the model minority without the effort that, mostly Black people did for civil rights. Right. So,
it's funny. Yeah, it's funny,
right?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because down here in America, during the probably 30s, 40s, that was a phrase that was commonly used. It's funny you said that about the good Asians, is that a lot of the white supremacists and stuff would say, why can't the coloreds, as they called Black people back then, be more like the good Asians? Be more like calm like the Asians. So yeah, that was something that was down here as well, the same kind of thing.
Oh, for sure. It is. It's this weird mentality that we're very much as a if you think about Asian diaspora culture, it's like, don't rock the boat too much, because when we rock the boat, bad things will happen, right? So you see a lot of portrayals of historical fiction pieces, like in movies and stuff like that. You'll see Asians portrayed as being like very yes to and not willing to stand up and not willing to fight. And it's not far from the truth, because we had this weird sort of you're not as bad as everybody else status.
Right.
You're still not one of us. You're still not one of us, but you're not as bad as everybody else. So we'll let you because you're useful to us or whatever, right? And it was it's problematic. It's a bad thing. And
because
so
culturally in history, like the Asian culture is pretty much across the board, I would say, had a very hierarchical and a very sort of submissive, with like the man definitely being the dominant.
Oh yeah, for sure. Historically, that's true. And it's I think, historically, there were also a lot of, like, if you look at Chinese culture, if you look at Japanese culture, a lot of it's very, even unto, just a little while ago for Japan, there's an emperor who is ordained by the gods to be the leader of the whole country and everything else. And then in China, that kind of got turned over in the 20s with like the last emperor and all that kind of stuff. But still, it's only been 100 years.
Right.
So and obviously, China has a very long and storied history. So there is a culture there that is very aware, I think, of what subservience brings you, which is it allows you to survive, and survival of the family and the individual is more important than, I don't know, full rights. I don't know how to say it, man.
But let me ask you something.
Yeah.
So your parents, you said they escaped depression over in China during the war, and all that kind of stuff. So with like their background, leaving that kind of society and then moving to a Western civilization in Canada, what was your upbringing like? In regards to what we're talking about, right? As far as submissiveness, as far as trying to fit in the culture, because you had a sort of clash of cultures, right?
100%.
So what was that like growing up for you?
It was hard. It was hard growing up, being different. So I was super different. So I grew up in a Roman Catholic school, being not Roman Catholic. So I wasn't baptized. I wasn't Roman Catholic. So I was othered just because of that. My friends, I put friends in air quotes, would tell me, "Oh, you're going to burn in hell." And they would be kind of happy about it. They'd be like, because I wasn't baptized, right? So that, and then my food always smelled weird. So I was that kind of kid who fought with their mom. So can't you just give me like a sandwich, not this, whatever this is. I mean, I know what this, whatever it is. It's usually like, rice with fish or something. Right. So, in the end, my mom, she did her best to try to fit in. She actually became known in our city, which had a lot of Italian people because I come from a steel city where a lot of Italians got work in the steel industry. And she was known in our community for making a really good pizza pie. And all the other moms who most of them are Italian.
Cool, huh?
It's kind of funny. Yeah. So anyway, so yeah, my mom tried really hard. She will go to her grave. She'll literally go to her grave. And the last thing she will say was like, I never made you hot dogs at lunch. That's like a source of pride for her, right? That she always served like good, healthy food at lunch.
Oh, because hot dogs were like below anybody. Is that
yeah, I guess. I don't know.
The worst type of food possible, hot dog.
I guess, as I ate hot dogs with my kids yesterday, so who knows? Yeah. But yeah, so it was difficult growing up because of a lot of those things. And I think about my parents a lot lately. Mm-hmm. They just live down the street now, by the way, but I still think about them because I realized, and it was actually by writing a game. So I wrote a game called Jiangshi, Blood in the Banquet Hall, which is about running an intergenerational restaurant, Chinese restaurant specifically, while fighting off vampires. So it's on Kickstarter right now. Nice. And it's a role-playing game, and it's doing really well. So I'm super happy that people are into that idea. But writing it actually helped me rectify a couple things about my parents, or think about my parents in a different way, and how much they sacrificed of themselves to get to Canada so that I could exist, right?
No, and it's good that you have that awareness about that, because sometimes, it's easy for a lot of people these days, especially, to forget about their predecessors or even just their parents, grandparents, what they had to go through. So it's good that you have that awareness. But I also want to ask you a little bit more.
Sure.
Did you ever, growing up, were you conflicted about whether or not to either embrace your Chineseness, for lack of a better term? You know what I mean?
No, exactly. I know exactly what you mean.
Or were you trying to, try to become Westernized Canadian? So what was your conflict, your personal conflict like growing up then?
So my personal conflict is that I don't speak Chinese very well. So it was.
But you do understand it and can.
Oh yeah. I mean, if you were breaking it down in skill points, I would have like a half, 1 point in speaking, 2 points in understanding, and then that's out of like 10 probably. But English obviously is much better. So that was a problem because when I think I didn't really embrace the culture until I moved down south to a bigger city. So I went to school in Hamilton, Ontario, which is about an hour south of Toronto, and McMaster's the university I went to. I went there for like 9 years, and it was much, much more cosmopolitan, to say the least, in terms of cultures and things like that. And it was really interesting because I felt in the Sioux, where there weren't many options, you just had to be Canadian. You just had to be. There's no other option. But at McMaster and in Hamilton, there were other options, right? So you could be generally Canadian, but have that little respite and go to hang out with people who looked like you, who talked like you, who understand your past and your history and your family and the food that you eat and the music that you grew up with and all that kind of stuff, without having to fake it. And that's kind of a weird way of putting it, but you feel like a stranger in a strange land a lot of times.
Oh yeah,
like you know that Sting song, I'm an Englishman in New York.
Yeah, there you
Take
go.
that and multiply it by like 1,000, because being an Englishman in New York is like nothing compared to being a person with a different colored skin that you can definitely recognize as not white, right?
Right.
And then put them in a place where they feel a little bit, out of place. And a lot of it isn't that Northern Ontario, or at the time or whatever, was hard particularly. It was more, and it wasn't that you were overtly made to feel like you were other. It was this subtle stuff. And I'll say this to this day, like I can smell a racist from a mile away. Absolutely. I know, and I mean, we've dealt with it all our lives. It's been 50 years for me almost that I've dealt with racism. And I know that, you know, if it's a racist, super racist situation, I'm just going to go. I'm not going to engage with that person. I don't need to like that person. They don't need to like me. We're never going to interact because we don't see eye to eye. It's more when your best friend says some weird racist thing.
Yes.
Right? Or their parents say some weird racist thing, or your parents say some weird racist thing. So my parents are hilarious. Like I married a white woman, right?
Okay.
Because that's what was around me, I guess. My poor wife, where is she? I don't know. But my mom would say stuff like, "So, if you have kids, what are they gonna be?" And I'd be like, "Well, Mom, they'll be Canadian." Right? And I just leave it at that. But it's like this weird kind of, there's some self-loathing going on. There's some internalized racism going on. No, today, me, right?
Yeah, but I want to ask you a little bit about the self-loathing. Yeah. That's where I was trying to go to. That's what I wanted to go to next with what we're talking about. So with your parents, this is kind of a two-part question, okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
So with them, say in particular, how did they view being Chinese, of obviously being different in the society they came to in Canada? How did they view other minorities, say Black people? I don't know if there were any where you grew up.
There were only 2 or 3.
Okay, so now within your house, or maybe from them, because coming from a strictly kind of monolithic society in China where pretty much everybody's just Chinese, right? Probably where they grew up.
Yeah, sort of.
You didn't
sort of like that.
Like you didn't have a big diversity probably where they came from. How did they feel a sense or impart that on you of I don't want to say inferiority. I mean, I think you know what I mean, but did they feel that they were different? Yes, like but it was sort of known, and how was that feeling?
Well, so I guess it really came up in things like parenting styles, and stuff like that. You know, so I'm Canadian. I was born in Canada. All my friends were Canadian. Pretty much all of them were born in Canada, except like 1 or 2. And I would see how their parents treated them, and I would be asking my parents, you know what? So I'm the top of the honor roll. Never missed a day in school. I don't do things like my friends do. And yet when I get like a 97 average, I get why didn't you get 100? This is like, I mean, there's a reason why these stereotypes exist, right? Because people have actually literally said these things. Like my dad had said that stuff. Like, what happened to the other 3%? Right? And I might say, my friend got a 60 and they got a car for graduating. Right. I got a, why didn't you get 3% more, right?
You got a hot dog.
I did not get a hot dog. That would have been worse than what they gave me, I guess, right? To them, you know, trying to pressure me to be the best that I could be is their way of showing love. And to be honest, and this may be the same thing for many immigrant families, is like giving you the best food they can afford. So i.e. not hot dogs, is them showing love. And I didn't understand that until I was way, way older. I think I probably learned it off of a BuzzFeed quiz or something, probably. You know, or some, you know, Asian parents show love by listicle. Because again, I didn't grow up with lots of Asian people. Right. I literally didn't. It wasn't until I went to university that I found other friends who were like me, like Asian, and we also liked the same things, right? Because in Sault Ste. Maria, it's like, you're Asian, but I don't like you, so we're not going to be friends just because we have the same skin color. I mean, that's not
right. But now that's not a thing. Right, but the people you met going to school, were a lot of them in sort of the same path as you, where they were a lot of first generation Canadians?
Yeah. Tons of first generations, and that's the thing. So it was really interesting. So there's a really, really interesting dynamic, because I mean, yeah, when you say monoculture, it's kind of a monoculture, but it's really not. So my parents, when they escaped escaped China, from the Japanese, they moved to a part of, well, it's not really Malaysia, it's Brunei, which is just to the right of Malaysia. And so they grew up in a country where they weren't wanted. They were seen as like not exactly refugees, but almost like you've come and taken over all the businesses here. Because the Chinese people were, if nothing else at the time, like to generalize, they were survivors, and they would spin anything up into a business to survive. and they were very good at it. And so they ended up like in places like Singapore and Malaysia and Brunei, where they in some of those countries are actually not even allowed to be citizens. But
really?
but they were the ones who formed like the economic backbone of those countries, because they formed a merchant class, like this middle merchant class, which is very different and very weird for those countries to have. And so there were some prejudices against them. There were like literal systemic things that they can't do, like, or they couldn't do at the time. But in the end, anyway, when my parents moved to Canada, and they tried so hard, for them to fit in and for us to fit in. Like, they have Canadian names. I don't have a Canadian name, which is really weird. My mom is Marie. My dad is Frank. It's the funniest thing ever to call them those names, but everybody does, except for me and my sister. So it was really weird that they decided not to for us. And then when I got down to Southern Ontario, where there were a lot more people from China, the thing about it is that most of the people that I met weren't actually from like China. They were from Hong Kong. And Hong Kong has a very different mentality towards things, especially at that time. So that would have been the 90s, right before the turnover happened. So they had, at that point, most of those kids would have grown up under, all of those kids would have grown up under British, not rule, but British guidance, and have a very Eurocentric view of things, as well as having, Chinese-centric view. And then a lot of Taiwanese. But the people that I actually hung around with more were like first generation. And a lot of the first generation people that I hung around were more actually Filipino. So nationally Filipino, but ethnically Chinese, or ethnically part Chinese. So a lot of my friends would be like Wayne Tan is and Errol Ellimer and Jamel Espejo. And so from those names, you can tell that some of them have some Chinese in them for sure, but then all of them have some Chinese in them, definitely, just because of how racial lines worked and how the diaspora worked, because the Philippines is super close as well. So that's who I ended up hanging out with a lot more, because we had a love of the same things, which are actually games. That's where, I mean, we can get back to the topic of Meepleville, which is games. And it's funny because that whole relationship with my friends in university is really what kind of solidified myself as, I want to make games. I like games. My parents originally got me into games when I was really young because they didn't know what to do with me. I was what you would call a precocious child. I was that child. Like, so by age of 6, I had read through like Lord of the Rings 3 times type stuff. And my parents were like, I don't know what else to do with this kid. So they dropped me off one Saturday. They dropped me off at like 11 o'clock at the basement of the university that's in my city. And I played Dungeons and Dragons, which was at that point, I think, Chainmail. I played Chainmail for like 6 hours with a bunch of 18 to 24-year-olds. So people who were like 3 to 4 times my age. And I loved it. And that's the origin story of me. It's me being uncontrollable. Not uncontrollable. I was very controllable, but I would constantly ask for something new to do or something to like occupy my time. And my parents just didn't know what to do with me. My parents are very like classical Chinese parents in a lot of ways. Like, they're very like, I'm not doing that with you. My dad to this day, I will remember, I would ask my dad, hey, why don't you play, chess with my kids? Because you like chess, or bridge. You love bridge. Why don't you play bridge with the kids? And he's like, I'm not going to play with them. They're not going to win ever. Why would I play with them? That's how my dad is towards things, right? So, I mean, I don't want to diagnose my father on air, but he's kind of probably autistic, right? So he's like super engineer. He has like very like almost zero social skills. The apple does not fall far from the tree. Sorry to tell you that. But my dad, I think my dad is like probably. I mean, we're all somewhere on the spectrum, but my dad is probably a little more.
Well, all game players. I mean, we're all kind of game players in general. We're all a little different. We all got it. So let me ask you something. So starting off with role-playing games, I guess you said you were real young, 6 years old and all that kind of stuff. Did you always have a propensity to get behind or find the gears of gaming, and that's why you became a designer
That's exactly what happened.
Instead of just the enjoyment of playing and hanging out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think with role playing, for me, it's about being able to express myself freely. But with most of the other stuff, what I would do is I would dissect games and I would like change them. So that's where it all started out. I would take a game and I'd say, I don't like how this works, or I'd take the kind of guts of it and turn it into something else. Like I can still remember to this day, my friends wouldn't play full on Dungeons and Dragons with me because they didn't get it. Like they just didn't understand. Like you don't have like figures, and because we didn't play with like lead figures. Like I still have my very first lead figures, like Adventurers Set 1 downstairs that I got, when I was 11 or something, because it didn't come out until then. There weren't like a lot of figurines, so we didn't really play a lot of map and figure D&D style, which is why I still don't to this day play that way. But my friends were like, I don't get this at all. So what I did for them was I made out of Lego dungeons. I would make dungeons out of Legos. We'd have little minifigures in Lego walking around. We'd use the polyhedral dice from Magic, and I dumbed down the system. Or not dumb. Simplify is a nicer term. I simplify the system for them so that they would actually like engage with it, right? So it's like, yeah, you have 5 magic missile spells, and I'd give them like 5 little 1 pieces of Lego. And when you want to attack something, just roll a d6, and that's how much damage it does. And we count damage on the Lego with like pulling pieces off and moving it down a track and all this type of stuff. So that's where it all started, was doing stuff like that. And then every project that I had in school, I would turn into a game. Like I would make a game out of it, and not like a Trivial Pursuit type game, which is Canadian. I would make like a full on like, this is a war game simulating the attack at this place at this time or whatever. I had a friend on Facebook contact me a while ago, and he said, hey, do you remember that game you made where you had 3 tiers? I had like the air, I had the land, and I had the sea level, and they would attack on different, like this is literally a 3-tiered board. Yeah, I was a little bit silly. I was a little bit silly at the time.
Okay, so let's come to the current where we're at now with one of your latest games, which I don't even think is, because I backed it, I know, on Kickstarter, but Mind Management, right?
Oh yeah.
So that probably drew a little bit from exactly what you're talking about now, from those younger days, making things for the D&D and doing all that kind of stuff, because it is a hidden movement game, if I'm not correct.
Yeah, for sure, it's a hidden movement game, 100% hidden movement.
And does it have a little bit of your kind of role-playing background in there? Yeah.
So the story of Mind Management is all about psychic agents who find out that the agency that they work for is not super cool. They are doing bad things, and so 4 of the agents, at least 4. Well, in our story, in our version of it, 4 to start, and then more. You'll unlock them as you play the game. Like rebel, basically become rogue agents and rebel against Mind Management, which is the name of the whole organization, to sort of say, hey, you're corrupt and we're going to stop you. And the reason why, I guess it does relate to role-playing, there's a couple of reasons, but it's a story that my friend Matt wrote. And he wrote this way before he was my friend. Like we bonded over games. It's hilarious. Matt Kint is like a New York Times best-selling graphic novelist. He's done tons and tons of comics for tons and tons of different companies. And this is one of his own personal creations that he owns all the rights to, which is why Jay and I decided to make it with him. And we met at Gen Con like 7 years ago, just on this weird whim when Oni Press, if you have seen like Aquacorn and things like that, they are now actually into games and publishing and like co-publishing and stuff like that. So Charlie Chu, who is one of the executive editors, I think you can call him that, editors, I'll just call him an editor at Oni Press at the time, had a booth there, and there's like some of my favorite comics were on display. I was like, what is this doing at Gen Con? Why are you guys here? And Charlie said, oh, we decided to come to sell The Sixth Gun, which is an amazing comic. If you've never read The Sixth Gun and you like comic books, read it. It's like a Weird West comic about like 6 possessed handguns. Really weird. But great comic by Cullen Bunn and Brian Hurt, who's the artist. Anyway, so what happened was at that time, Brian and Cullen were at Gen Con because there was a supplement for Savage Worlds based on the Sixth Gun. And Charlie told me this, and I said, "Oh, that's amazing! I'll go get it." He said, "Oh, why don't you just hang out here for a second? They'll be right back." I said, "What? They'll be right back?" And I'm not a fanboy. I really don't fanboy out much about things, like ever. But it was like, oh, this is a cool opportunity, and they like games, and so we started talking. We started talking about Dead of Winter, and I said, "Oh, you like Dead of Winter?" I said, "Hey, wait one second." I text Jonathan, and Jonathan comes over. John Gilmore, and we start talking about games. And then Charlie said, "Oh, do you know who Matt Kint is?" I said, "Yes." And so Matt's the author of this, and Jay is a huge fan of Matt Kint, like huge. Like we have art from Matt Kint. Well, Jay has art from Matt Kint from before we ever knew Matt Kint, before we ever knew him personally. Like he's gone to Comic Cons and got Matt to draw things for him as a fan. And so I texted Jay, then, "Jay, Matt Kint is here." And so we just got started talking. We ended up really liking each other. And so this does go back to role playing because of the Savage World supplement. And then Matt, really, because he's studio partners with Brian, said, "I really want a game made from my stuff too." He's a little jealous, maybe, I don't know, envious. And so he said, "Well, you know what? We can do that. Let's talk about that." And so over a love of gaming, comic books, and stuff like that, we made the game. Right. And so it does all come back to role-playing in a lot of ways that, without that, we would have never made Mind Management because we would have never met Matt.
Right,
It's just this real confluence of like karma.
Oh, good.
Whatever. Yeah, whatever you want to call it.
Right. I'm really looking forward to the game because it sounds really, really good. And you did bring up Jay. So I want to ask a little bit about how did your partnership start? How did you meet Jay? How did all of that, the Bamboozle Brothers, begin?
Oh, cool. Yeah. So Jay and I have been friends for years. And we started off as friends and we'll end as friends. And we're business partners in the middle. Jay, through one of my Asian friends who I already mentioned. So Errol, who is a very good friend of mine. And if you like escape rooms, I don't know if you do any escape rooms, Tim, but Errol is very, very large in the escape room industry. So he runs a podcast called Room Escape Divas, and he's very well known in the escape room industry, which there are a lot of in Las Vegas, I hear. But anyway, so Errol was a friend of mine, and he was friends with me because we are Asian and we sang songs. So we were part of an a cappella group together, along with Errol, Wayne and Jamel and Peter, and a couple other people. We sang a cappella. And Errol's actually quintessential in a lot of this story. So friends, right? He lived in a different residence than I did called Edwards Hall. I think he lived in Edwards. He might not have, but maybe he did. Anyway, he eventually knew this guy, Jay, who was having a house party. And he said, "Oh, you want to come?" It's like, "Yeah, sure, let's go." It was the middle of summer. We had stayed for summer school. Errol and I both live very far away. Errol actually is from a whole different province. And I was from, about 10 hours north of where the school is. So it's like, yeah, we're not going home. We'll stay here for the summer. And so somebody was having a house party in the summer. And what you do as college students, you go to house parties. And so we were there. And this guy, this tall, lanky white dude comes up to me and says, "Do you want to see my Amiga?" And if you know what an Amiga is, at the time, so in the early 90s, an Amiga, it's a computer. Okay. It's a Commodore Amiga, and it would have been like one of the more graphically powerful computers of the time. Right? So like color, raster graphics, vectors, all this kind of stuff. And we bonded over video games first. And then eventually we lived together because what do you do as college students? You end up moving off campus and living in houses with random people who you end up liking. And so Jay and I lived together several times, and Errol lived together with us. And through all this interaction, what happened was that we played a heck load of games together, whether they started out as video games or board games or whatever. We would play them. And eventually, we both, all three of us, played a lot of Magic, which was really, to me, kind of the gateway into game design for reals.
Okay. For a lot of people, I'm sure.
Yeah, because before that happened, I should tell you that I quit gaming. So I actually got really serious about school, unlike Jay, unlike Errol, really. I kind of got more serious about school than either of them. Which shows because I'm the professor and they're not professors. So I became a professor. That's how serious I became about school. I said, I'd like to stay here forever. And they had more time, but I didn't have a lot of time. So I quit role-playing games because role-playing games at the time were very much like, a 10-year arc of a campaign, right? So no, I'm not doing that. I just couldn't. I loved it, but I couldn't because it ate up way too much of my brain space. And so I stopped probably around the time when things like Shadowrun came out. Shadowrun was probably the last big RPG that I played that wasn't Dungeons and Dragons. And so I gave up on role-playing. But I did happen to get hooked on things like Magic, which was not as bad time-wise, but worse money-wise. And so I had to give that up too. I sold all my cards to pay for my master's degree, basically. And then Warhammer as well. So I played a lot of Warhammer 40K. Eventually sold that as well, just because it was expensive, right? So lots of the things would either take time or money. And then Errol, just before he graduated and moved off to work at IBM in Toronto, no, it wasn't. It was because he graduated and went off to work at IBM in Toronto. He discovered, or people introduced to him, I think through his church, they introduced what we called at the time German games, right? Okay. So like Catan, and his big like gateway game for him was Bonanza, right?
Okay.
So he would show everybody Bonanza. Everybody would play Bonanza, and we really kind of got into that, playing those. And the reason why it stuck was because I didn't have to dedicate hundreds and hundreds, actually thousands and thousands of dollars to play. I have a very addictive personality where I owned at one time 4 of every card in existence.
Wow.
Like I don't just mean like 4 Black Lotuses. I mean 4 Black Lotuses from each set of cards.
Right.
Ever. Until I think just past Ice Age, like the Dark, I think is when I quit collecting cards.
That's exactly what I did too. Yeah,
because it got ridiculous. And it's like I could sell this and pay. Like I said, I literally paid for a whole other degree at school when I sold my cards. I sold them all to a collector in Italy in one go because I was like, I'm not piecemealing this. I'm just going to sell them all. So what was this weird time of the internet where they would buy cards sight unseen? It was strange.
Right. So what was so after you met Jay and you guys got together, what was the first game that you guys made?
Oh my god. It's here. It's on my shelf somewhere. It is horrible. The first game we made was this game because so Jay, you have to understand, loves Indiana Jones. And if you're out there and you're listening to this podcast or this video cast, seeing it, and you have control of the IP for Indiana Jones, holler at your boy because we will make that game for you. Jay absolutely loves Indiana Jones. So the first game we made ever was like, hey, let's make something about Indiana Jones-ish. And so we made this game where you were, each player was like an Indiana Jones-like person exploring a jungle, trying to find things in the jungle. And it stunk. It was really bad. There were lots and lots of bad things about it. The least of which was not how we portrayed natives as attacking people all the time. That was bad. We had a lot to learn. And the game design around it was really like take that and it was just not good. And so we thought we sucked and we shelved it and we didn't talk about it again. It's like, let's bury this over here and never talk about it again type stuff. But fast forward a couple of years after that, and I had my first son, Ethan, who's now 16. So this is 14 years ago. We go out to visit Jay. And this time Jay had moved to Vancouver, which is, 3,000 odd kilometers away from where I live. So about 2,000 and some miles, I think. And he had started a new career with Best Buy at the time that Best Buy had moved into Canada. And he was very, very successful. And so it was like, I guess he's not moving back. And we knew he wasn't moving back when he finally found a girlfriend that he would like stick around with for a long time. Okay, it's like he's definitely not moving back. So when we had gone out there to visit, we figured that, you know, we need something to do online that we can, focus the friendship around. It wasn't that we wouldn't be friends without it, but with it would be better friends, right? And so we thought, let's get back into those games. We love games. We play games all the time. And it's sad that we can't play together because there was at the time like no technology that you could do that with. We had, tried to play video games online, but with the time difference, 3-hour time delay between Vancouver and London, it was like, no, this isn't working. Like we never found time that we were both awake enough, to actually do like a Twitch type of gameplay. Like we played a lot of like Halo and things like that at the time. That was the best kind of multiplayer game you could get. But it was like, yeah, this isn't cutting it for this, for our friendship. We wanted something more involved, something that we could do. And so we actually started designing asynchronously over a forum. We used like basically an expanded BBS, right? So we use PHPBB, which is like a PHP scripted bulletin board system. So we could hyperthread everything, which was really important because it allowed us to not lose track of what we were doing.
Right.
And the nature of our relationship was such that we really developed by bouncing ideas off each other and explaining things to each other. Because at the time, if you remember, this is like the mid 90s the early 2000s still. But there's like no real easy access to digital cameras even at the time.
Right.
Like, seriously, like I had a Sony digital camera that was like this big, and you'd have to take a card out of it and stick it into a second card reader that you had to buy for your computer and take like 5 minutes to download a really crappy picture. So there wasn't this instantaneous video communication that we have now. And so this asynchronous board was really powerful because not only did this allow us to talk out of time with each other, but it allows us to take the time to upload things, take the time to actually tell you what I mean in words. I'm writing it, and it strengthened our like writing ability because I get up in the morning and Jay would respond to something I wrote the night before and said, I don't understand what you mean in this. I said, oh, this is what I mean. It's like, oh, that's better. Now I get it, right? So it helped us kind of sharpen our swords in terms of articulating our ideas to each other, which I think has made us better game designers over time.
Right. So when you come up with an idea then, so like when you decide of like an idea for a game and say, it's say 50-50. So I'm going to start there because you're both collaborators. Your name is both in the game, 50-50. So is there any games, I'm sure there are, where like it's 90-10, 80-20, or do you very much try to make sure it all comes as close to 50-50 as possible? How does that collaboration
work? It's
work?
almost always 50-50. It just depends on what you think the work is, right? So, so for things like pitching, I'll just give you an example. This is actually a really good example, just in the microcosm of pitching a game. So Jay has worked in sales for decades and decades and decades. Like even when we were in university, he was in sales all the time. He started his degree in business. And so he's also been like a street magician and improv actor and things like that. I act, but he's like off the cuff. So he's always like the face and I'm always the planner. So what I'll do in pitching is I will organize stuff. I'll set up stuff. I'll tear stuff down. I'll book the appointment. I will, order the sheets in the order that we show them in. That's what I do. And I'm like the third player. Jay is the face and the talker. And so when we're doing the pitching, the actual pitching, it'll seem like Jay has done a ton more of the pitch, but really he couldn't do it without me and I couldn't do it without him. Invariably, our co-pitches are much better than our solo pitches because we all have skills and some skills are better than others. And so the organizational stuff that I do behind the scenes or at the scene that you don't get to see is like stuff like, oh, yeah, you don't want this game? Good. And I cleared off the table, but Jay's still talking, right? So to make us more efficient, we kind of hyper specialize in our skills. In things like Scooby-Doo, like if you've played the Scooby-Doo Escape from the Haunted Mansion game by the Op that Jay and I co-designed, which is based on a video game, oddly enough. Not totally based, but the idea is based on video games.
Right.
Point and click adventures, specifically like Escape from so it's like Monkey Island and Fate of Atlantis, bringing it back down to Indiana Jones, Double Fine type point and click games. That game, Jay did probably a lot more of the puzzle design, but I did a lot more of the writing. So it depends. Like we all have our strengths. And we all have different things that are kind of around us. And also the other thing is that I was doing, so for the bulk of our career together, I had kids. I had young kids, 2 young kids. And now my kids are older. So my kids are now 16 and 12. Jay has twins that are 3. So for the past 3 years, Jay hasn't been super involved with, he can't really go to cons.
Right.
He can't really do that kind of stuff yet. So he's now getting back into that, and which is why he started more of the publishing side of things. So on that end, so for things like my management, that's all Jay in terms of the publication. I'll help him with as much as I can, but because he's getting the lion's share of the money, it's like that's on him to do that kind of stuff. I'll help him with proofreading, and I'll help him decide stuff. Like he'll always email me late at night and say, "Hey, I'm thinking of running an ad. What do you think of the wording?" It's like, yeah, that's great. Or no, try this. That's fine. I'll help him with that for sure. But he's the one that puts it all in order. He's the one that is, paid out the money for that. And then, so he's going to be the one that reaps more of the reward for that. And I'm going to be just, receiving my royalty like I would from any other publisher.
Right. So when you had like ideas for games, so when they're like pitched to the table, or you like, I'm sure everybody has ideas. You've got a dozen ideas. He's got a dozen ideas. How does the whittling process come down to where you're like, okay, you know what? We're going to go ahead and work on this game, because, you can't work on 50 at a time because nothing will ever get done.
Yeah.
There has to be a point where you say, okay, we're going to work on this game. How does that work?
So for me, to be completely honest, and I think Jay knows this, and all the co-designers I work with probably know this, is that I don't actually particularly have any passion towards any particular game.
Okay.
It's not that I don't. It's I think I like almost all of them equally. I think they're cool. Whereas other people that I work with seem to have like this really big high and low in terms of their passion. So generally, I let them lead. And this isn't to say that I'm being lazy. This is to say that it doesn't bother me which one we pick. I just want to make a game. But if you really like game A more than game B, let's do game A because you seem passionate about it. Right? I want to harness that passion. And I can feed into both of those games as much or as little as needed. But if one person in the team doesn't have passion, it's really hard to get that project done.
Right. Okay. Well, let me pick one then. Let me say, let's go for Belfort. Like, whose idea was Belfort? How did say that?
So this is interesting because again, video games, and it was actually probably one of the first video games that Jay ever showed me on his Amiga. It's based on Warcraft. Oddly enough, like it doesn't seem like it's based on Warcraft, but it is. It's based on actually the peons of Warcraft, because Jay always found it funny when the peons would say stuff like "Yes, my lord." So we made a game about the peons. Really, that's what it is. And all it was at the beginning. We have a very minimal, what's the word? Ethos to our first design. So we designed like on a most minimal viable prototype mentality. So how small can this be and still work is our first prototype. So literally all it was like recipe cards and paper clips. That's all it was. That was Belfort. Recipe cards and paper clips. And Jay showed me the game, and as soon as he said it, it's like, that's cool, but it needs to be bigger. And I took out my sketchbook. I might still have it somewhere here. I don't know where it went. I took out one of my sketchbooks. I have like 70 billion of them. And I drew a picture of what I thought the map was look like. And to this day, it still looks the same. Like it looks exactly the same as what I drew it.
Oh, wow. So how long was the process then from that point, say around the early stages? What was the length of time before it actually became a published game?
Probably about 2 years before it got signed, and then another year before it got published. I think that's probably right. So at this time, Jay and I were visiting each other like maybe twice a year.
Okay.
So I would fly out to Vancouver once, and he would fly back to Ontario about once or maybe twice, depending on how much work he had in Ontario. So Jay's work would always pay for him to fly, but I would have to fly out there on my own dime because he would often come to Ontario to do like corporate events for the whole of Best Buy type stuff. So when he was here, he'd always tag on like a couple extra days at the end to spend time with me and make games. And so one of those times he had brought this thing, this like it was 24 cards and like 24 paper clips and a couple cubes. That's what it was. And it was the seed of the idea that Belfort should, or this game, we didn't call it Belfort at the time. It should come out of I'm sending things to go collect things and they bring it back and I use those things to build things. That's what it was. And so each of the cards with the little paperclip was really tracking how much stuff of the stuff that I brought back by sending out my units. And there wasn't any theme at the time until that day. Well, actually there was a theme at the time because we had talked about, it should be, let's do elves and dwarves. And elves and dwarves were really easy because we wanted to use things like wood and stone. So we thought, all these worker placement games, and there really weren't many. It was like Kalis. That was probably about it for the well-known worker placement games, although other games would be technically worker placement games at the time too. But Kalis was the one we were like, that's a great game. How do we differentiate ourselves from that? And we thought, what if we'd have different types of workers that can do different types of things? And so Belfort actually comes from that. Really, that's the differentiator. Or the biggest one of the bigger differentiators is how does that come into play? So elves and dwarves work differently. They're both workers, but they're different classes of workers, and they can do things apart. They can do things together.
Now I know you don't have. I know. I'm sorry. I know you don't have any say in this probably, but what's going on with the deluxe edition from TMG?
Oh, that's a TMG thing. I
know it is, but I'm like, I backed it a long time ago. Like, where is it?
Oh yeah, I would love to know as well. So that's one for TMG to answer. Unfortunately, I can't because I actually literally don't know.
And they don't even give you any updates or anything about that?
No, not recently.
No,
it's unfortunate. I would love to know as well.
Yeah.
So So anyway. So because we could only travel back and forth maybe twice to 3 times a year at most, it took a long time to develop, but we both have playtesting teams individually in both cities. So that makes it a little bit easier. Right. The fact that we could actually physically get together at that time was good. But also it was at a time when games were a little bit, less refined than they are today. But we took a lot of time on this one. We built it up and we stripped it back down and we added stuff. We took it out. And it took a long time to make because it's a bigger game. If I was to make it again today, and we sort of redid it a little bit in the no red tape rules version, which just really changes the rules. But if we were to do it again today, I'm sure there would be some stuff that we do a little bit differently, but it would change some of the components. So we really couldn't redo it on the reprint.
Right. Now, speaking of components, let me jump real quick because we don't have a whole lot of time left.
Yeah, sure.
Speaking of components, junk art, right?
Oh, yeah.
Now, I heard, I was watching one of your previous interviews, and I know you whittled down the pieces from a amount down there. So how did you arrive at the final, 15 pieces?
Yeah.
To get to know that those were the perfect ones to work to make the game work.
We lined them up and we voted. No, it's literally true, actually. So, that's the final phase. But to get there, we had tons and tons and tons and tons of pieces. And so what I would do is I would go to like a craft store like Michael's. I'm not sure what the equivalent is in the States. I think you do have.
We have them. Yep.
Yeah. So like Michael's.
Yep.
So Michael's at this time had all of these really cheap, like $1, $2 model kits that came in like a box about this size for like cars and helicopters and airplanes. And they're just wooden models, not like plastic models, but wooden models that came with glue and paint and sandpaper and the wooden bits that you'd stick together to make this thing. And I went into the local Michael's and I bought every single one of them they had. And from there, I just just picked the pieces from all of these model kits that I thought were cool. And then we started playing with them. Like because we at that time, so the cool thing about having the model kits was that we now had 4 identical pieces for each piece, right? Because I'd buy at least 4 of each model kit. And the reason why that's important is because I can't do woodworking, not really well anyways. I have like a router and a drill and that kind of stuff, but I'm not, it's actually really hard to make small pieces because of blade width and things like that. So I do a lot of hand cutting with like Japanese saws.
Okay.
But it's hard work, so I don't want to do it. Again, not because I'm lazy, but because it hurts my hands. So doing that for like many pieces is hard work. So we started with these pieces that were already fabricated. And all I did was I glued them together in weird configurations, and then I drill holes in them or cut slots in them. And that's those weird slots that you see in junk art. You can actually slide other pieces in because they're actually dimensionally proportionate to the other pieces.
I see. Okay.
And the holes are actually the same thing. So a lot of the columns, or like the long skinny column, will actually fit through some of those holes. And they're purposely built that way so you can do weird things with them. And you can like cantilever them, so you can have like a Frank Lloyd Wright looking building going on when you cantilever the part in one of the slots. And so we had originally we actually had less pieces, and then what happened was this: when Pretzel Games, which is part of Plan B, got a hold of it, and they talked to their manufacturers about, let's make this thing. The manufacturer said, "Oh, hey, we have all these other parts of mass amounts. What do you think? You want them?" And so we actually got more parts to put in the game because the toy company the factory that they were using had all these leftover parts from toys. If you look at one of them, there's one of the, it's like a fat cylinder. It has a hole on the top.
Okay.
That is literally most likely, I can't guarantee this, but it's most likely part of a choo-choo train.
Oh, really?
Yeah, right? Because choo-choo trains have that front barrel, and then they have the top thing that's a smokestack. That's probably what it's from.
So let me ask you something real quick, because we're almost out of time here. So in reference to junk art, so when it was first came out, as you said, from Pretzel Games, come out of this nice big wooden box, the wooden piece.
Yeah.
But now it's like a plastic, smaller plastic pieces. Do they come to you, or do you have any say at that point how the design of the game is made? Do they even ask you for something like that?
Yeah, they do. I mean, they ask our opinion, and our opinion does count somewhat. So it's funny. It's actually your opinion that counts more as a retailer, because that's all retail reaction. So the heirloom version, I call it an heirloom version because that was the original premise of Pretzel Games in a lot of ways. It was like, we're going to create big, juicy, full wooden games with a full wooden box that you could pass down from generation to generation. And it's going to be a family heirloom. That's what it's going to be. And then what happened was that, the MSRP on those boxes is really high, and the shipping is really high. Like, well, as a store, you understand that bottom line is the bottom line,
right?
And it's a good game, it's a great game, but for some people, it's not a $70 MSRP game or whatever it is MSRP with the wooden box. Now, what also happened then was the plastic pieces. So the plastic pieces, if you've ever measured them side by side, are like 15% smaller.
Okay.
They also are perfect. Like they are milled to perfection, which is different because all individual junk art pieces are individually weird. If you have a wooden set, your wooden set may be a little bit different than the other person's wooden set, just because of how things glue and dry. Because there are fabricated pieces in there, other than just milled pieces. But all of the pieces that are in the plastic set are milled and heat fused, most likely. I can't remember. I only have like one. I never play with the plastic set, by the way.
But not injection molded?
I don't know what they are, to be honest.
Okay.
I think, you might be. I don't know if they're actually spun. I actually don't know. They might be. I'll have to look. But I don't see like mold lines and stuff like that the same way. But they might be. I haven't looked in a long time. But they're also really textured. So they have this texturization on it, which is different. But they're all perfect, is my point, really. That they're all perfect, which is much better for like a competition, but doesn't allow your set to have this like uniqueness to it. So a lot of people ended up. Oh, and the plastic, by the way, costs significantly less because it also comes in a paper box and a cardboard box.
Mm-hmm.
So we had on one hand the wooden pieces in the wooden box, on the other hand we had the plastic pieces in the cardboard box, and retailers hated both.
Yeah.
Well,
let me ask you something. What did the I don't need exact numbers, but did the sort of return equal out? Because say you were getting a bigger cut from the bigger MSRP, but now you're getting maybe a smaller cut, but they're able to do more volume, and it probably equals out to about the same.
I mean, yeah, probably. I haven't looked. I think so. I think it's probably roughly similar. The issue is perception, really, right? So it's price point and perception. So and it's not that retailers hated them, to be honest. That's not really the it's still a super popular game. But what retailers gave the feedback was like customers don't want the plastic,
right?
But customers can't afford the wooden box.
Yeah, it is a tough thing there. Yeah, it's a little bit of both.
Right, because it was both, right? So what the next version will be is the merger of two. So I'm pretty sure the next copies that come out will be wooden pieces in cardboard box.
Okay, that's
likely what you'll see next. Right. Yeah, and so that's sort of the market will bear the load type idea of research and action type stuff.
Right. So, Sen, let me ask you real quick. So what do you have? Is there anything you can tell us? I know you said you had the one game on Kickstarter right now, the RPG about the Chinese restaurant, and that's real interesting.
Yeah, you're fighting vampires.
Yes. So the exact name of that, and people can find that now on Kickstarter, correct?
It's Jiangshi, Blood in the Banquet Hall. Jiangshi is spelled Jiangshi. It's the Mandarin words for stiff corpse. So it's hopping vampires. If you've ever watched any Chinese vampire movie from like the 80s, that's what it is. It's like
so we can find it right now on Kickstarter. And do you have anything else you might be able to tell us about that you have coming up?
So if you've played the Scooby-Doo game, Scooby-Doo Escape from the Haunted Mansion, we have another game in the same series coming out, but not Scooby-Doo. It's The Shining. So it's Shining, Escape from the Overlook Hotel.
Okay.
And there is a third game that we're doing for that series right now that I can't tell you about, but I'll tell you there's a third game. And what else is coming out? So last year, it was last year. Pretty sure it was last year. Yeah. So Kingdom Rush. We've seen the wet box copies. So those are like the production proofs. In France, they look great so far. Vince is working really hard on getting those things out. So that's great. So Kingdom Rush is coming out. And, things are looking really good. That could be something that we do more work on. Nudge, nudge, hint, hint, say more. Okay. So yeah, there's lots of stuff that, there's always stuff in the works where I think we can talk about things that are coming out in the future. So Mind Management, like you mentioned, will be out, sooner than later, because it's. I think Jay sent it to print a little while ago.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, we're talking about stuff. We're hopeful that things get, that we're able to work on some of the properties that we've gotten to work on in the past more and more. It's just a question of, will the licensors, do the licensors want to do it? Do the publishers want to do it? There are more games coming out that we're working on. What else is coming out? Yeah, that's about it, really.
And then lastly, just let everybody know where they can find you on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and all that kind of stuff. So that way people can go ahead and find you and find out about your games.
Yeah. So the best place to find me on Facebook is the Meeple Syrup Show, which is a show that I do very much like this, which is basically interviewers. We're interviewing other designers. So it's myself, Jesse Wright, and Erica Hayes-Burris, all designers from Canada who are interviewing other designers and other industry people about the industry in general from a design perspective. They're like, we want to know what it means for a designer to do when we talk to a graphic artist, or when we talk to a store owner, or when we talk to a convention runner. So that's Meeple Syrup. You can find us on Facebook. There is a show, Meeple Syrup Show, and there's a forum called Meeple Syrup Shop Talk, which is our private group, which you can join. That'd be great. And then also, you can find me on Twitter at Sen-Foong Lim, and that's just all one word, SENFOONGLIM. And that's usually where I talk about more game-related stuff. Although, it's a channel, so there's often other stuff on there. So tabletop, role-playing games, card games, board games, and then a little bit of social activism on that one.
Yes, I've been following that, and it's very good. A lot of the things you say, and I really appreciate it in the community because, again, especially with the Black Lives Matter going on right now, movement that has been started, that it has been amplified, and I'm glad that people like you are being one of the forerunners in making sure that people are more aware of it. And you're not a Johnny come lately either. You have been doing this for a while, so thank you for doing that. And there needs to be more attention paid towards that, and we just need to make sure that that keeps moving forward and doesn't get forgotten soon, right?
Yeah, that's the deal, right? So if you believe in the cause, just keep amplifying the voices that are talking about it. You don't even need to talk about it yourself. Just like retweet, repost.
Just keep it active.
Keep it consistent, keep it active, and keep talking about the injustices that are happening right now. And I think it's a really important thing to talk about. We Tim and I are probably from the generation that was like, where we were raised to be colorblind, right? Or I mean, maybe we weren't, but
it was hard for me.
Yeah, but a lot of other people were probably raised to be colorblind, right? And we're like, yeah, we don't have that luxury because everywhere we go, we see color. But we see where that's gotten us, right? It actually hasn't worked. So it's like a failed social experiment. I'm a psychology professor, and I would rate this experiment as a failure.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that at a whole other time. We can bring a couple more guests, and that'd be nice to have a nice little panel and more discussion on that as we do. So, but cool. Sen, thank you very much for joining me this morning. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
For you over there in Canada. And we'll definitely look forward to your games. Like I said, I have Back Mind Management. The Scooby-Doo at the Haunted Mansion is brand new out. We haven't got it in stock yet, but we'll be getting that soon.
Yay!
And again, I'm looking for the 10th anniversary of Belfort. Hopefully out soon too. But again, thank you one more time, Sen. We really appreciate it.
Problem.
All right. And I'm just going to go ahead and say goodbye to the folks. So, ladies and gentlemen, there you go. Thank you for joining us for another edition of Meepleville Meets. That was Sen Lim. He is part of the Bamboozle Brothers, and you can check out all of his games, as he said, on his website, on his forums. And go check out Meeple Syrup also, so you can hear discussions of designers talking about the industry, how it affects them, and check out. It's a really good podcast show. You can listen to that, so go check that out. But anyway, thank you for joining us for another episode of Meepleville Meets. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.